This is one of the most iconic boots in all of boot history, and it defined the iconic hiker style. But I got this boot in hand and it does not look like it's worth the price. So is this just another example of a brand claiming heritage that ends up just being a hoax? Or is this actually a good boot that represents the cool history and lineage and heritage of Danner? We're gonna find out by cutting it in half, running through the test to see if it's actually heritage or if it's all just a hoax. So what is this boot? Well, the brand is obviously Danner. The style is the Mountain Light Cascade. They weigh 1 pound, 12.5 ounces, and they retail for a steep $430, and they're made in the USA. Danner positions this boot as the Mountain Light Cascade is a tribute to one of Danner's iconic hiking styles introduced in the early 1970s, a style believed by many to be the greatest backpacking boot of all time. Made in our Portland, Oregon factory, the boot features a rich, full-grain leather upper and flat red laces. The rugged Vibram Kletterlift outsole is perfect for outdoors and casual use. So pretty bold claims about this being the greatest backpacking boot ever, but one word really stuck out to me, and that was tribute. And we've seen this used a few times by brands who have a reputable, good name to sell a really terrible product. So we're gonna try to find out if this is really one of the greatest backpacking boots of all time, or if it's just a tribute to one of the greatest backpacking boots of all time. Because there are a few things that do look like they're high quality and things that stand out that might justify some of that price, like the leather, because this is a really unique way of making a boot. Because if you notice, there is no seam for the vast majority of this boot as it wraps around to the one seam at the heel stay, or the heel counter, or the back stay, whatever it's called. And that's because this is a hole cut boot. And what that means is it's pretty self-explanatory. It's like one cut of leather makes up the majority of the whole of the boot. And this is really popular for hiking boots because it doesn't give you any hard pinch points where multiple layers of leather are overlapping. It doesn't allow water to seep through the stitching to make your boots wet. And being one single piece of leather, it conforms and shapes to the shape of your foot. And it's 2.5 millimeters thick, so a good thickness for a dependable, durable boot. But because it is one solid piece of leather, when you lay this flat, it's like a big chunk of leather. And you can only get 3 or 4 pieces like that out of a hide because of how many blemishes are on a hide, because it's a cow that lived, and any hard bug bite or barbed wire scar is gonna show up. And so that's what's really actually impressive about this leather, is that it is a fairly natural leather. There's a little teeny bit of pigment put into it, but for the most part, this is a flawless piece of leather. And especially this being an American tanned leather, and it being a full grain leather, because we cut through the cross section and we can see that grain, and you'll notice there is that bluing on the inside, and that can be a sign of a really poor leather. So the reason they have that bluing on the inside is to get this light of a leather and to have these light undertones when you flex it. You can't have a dark dye all the way through the boot. You have to have as bright of a color on the inside to get those highlights, and that's why they leave the core of the leather. It's blue color caused by the chromium salts that convert the flesh into leather. So kind of an interesting little tidbit of leather info. So all in all, the leather is really good, and I can see how the whole cut could justify some of the price, but it's definitely not the whole reason why this boot is $430. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. And I'm not talking about some of that woo-woo, obnoxious, healing, cold bath, all the other BS. I'm talking about some real things that you can actually use, like Fume, the sponsor of this video, and they look at the problem in a different way, because not every bad habit is wrong. So instead of just drastically and uncomfortable changing your entire life, why not just remove that one bad thing from the habit? And that's exactly what Fume has done with their innovative award-winning device, this guy right here. And instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural, and instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. What I mean by that is this little teeny pod, it just has a really strong smell. So when you breathe it in, you smell it and you don't really like taste it. You're not breathing anything in, you're just basically smelling the scent. So what that does is you have the physical action and you have that mental connection to a smell that reinforces that habit instead of trying to completely break that habit, which replaces the one bad aspect of that habit, making the whole habit a lot easier to break because you don't even have to break the habit. And the best thing about this is it's fun to play with, because a lot of times when it comes to a habit, there's some sort of tactile thing, something to keep your hands occupied. And that's what this does, because you have this little airflow thing on the bottom. It's nice and heavy, it has a nice tactile feel to it. And that in and of itself also helps with the other aspects of breaking a habit, because you can just sit here and play with this when you're stressed out. So start creating positive habits with Fume. Check them out via link in my description. These things are pretty cool and a great way and a very scientific and smart way to break a habit. So check them out below, and thanks again to Fume. So if we look at how this boot is made, it's in the 360 stitch down construction style, where the upper of the boot, instead of being tucked underneath and a welt sewn to it or glued to an outsole, they actually flare out and create a flange with the upper leather that then is sewn down through the midsole, or at least the slip sole, and then the outsole is glued on. So this is a really popular style of construction. You know, the Pacific Northwest use a 270 stitch down, Jim Green uses a stitch down construction. So we see it in more of the affordable boots, and we see it in the high-end work boots. So the pros of this style of construction is a little bit more watertight, because you don't have as many holes going to the inside of the boot, and it's a simpler style of construction, which makes it easier, faster, and more affordable to make, which does not make for a great argument for this boot being $430. And to test the waterproofness, we dunked it in the water tank, and it is actually fairly watertight. You know, we left it in for 5 minutes, and there was just a little bit of water that seemed to be coming through the eyelets here. So with how this boot is made, it's not that it's a cheap style construction, but we just see it more often in the more affordable boots because it's easier, faster, and cheaper to make. So it's not an indicator of a poor quality boot, but for a $430 boot with not a whole lot of other things pointing to the value of being worth $430, I would say that's a, I would consider this maybe, so I would consider this a, so I would consider this, so I would say this construct, so I would say the construction, so I would say this, so I would say how this boot is made. So I would say the way this boot is built does not add any value and does not justify any additional cost above any other boot that's half the price of this boot. And there's one thing that I really, really do not like about this boot, and that is the jersey mesh liner on the inside of a hiking boot. You know, I see what they're doing because it's gonna be a little bit more breathable, it's gonna absorb your sweat, but the problem is if you're really using this as a hiking boot, this material is gonna wear out fairly quick, especially at the heel and especially at the toe because of how narrow this last is. You're just naturally gonna wear through that. And what most boots do to fix that is they'll use a more durable material, or they'll actually have a dedicated counter cover on the inside that won't wear through, because this jersey material will not last nearly as long as the rest of this boot. So to me, that does not scream quality, and that does not justify a price bump, especially up to $430. And the final thing I want to go over is where this boot really excels, and that's in the sole construction, because there's basically two types of boot soles. There's hard rubber soles that last a really long time, but they're really hard underfoot, and there's soft, squishy soles that gives you all that comfort and all the squish underfoot, so you don't wear your knees out and back out, your feet don't hurt at the end of the day. A lot of times you have to choose one or the other, but with this boot, they've combined the best of both worlds. You've got that thick, heritage, really hard rubber outsole skin, but then right above that, you have an entire layer of a softer foam that gives you the hard grip and durability of that rubber outsole, plus the soft squishiness of like a foam-based outsole. And so this is not a revolutionary thing. Lots of brands do this, but I really, really like this style of outsole and construction. So that doesn't necessarily add any value, because we've seen boots cheaper than this use the exact same outsole construction. So now let's cut this thing in half, and let's just pray that there's something on the inside, because we have not found enough quality things on the outside to justify that steep price tag of $430. So let's cut it in half. All right, we got it chopped in half. And once again, these are so pricey, $430 just to cut in half. So if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, because that's how we pay for these boots, to show you exactly what you're spending your hard-earned money on. So just click that subscribe button if you haven't. So let's see what's inside. I honestly prepped the line. I was going, damn, Danner, but it didn't work, because everything that I hoped that was on the inside was not there, because all that's in here is the lining, the cheap fiberboard underneath, and one good thing, it does have a nice fiberglass shank. Nice touch there, Danner. I do actually like that a lot. And then you have a rubber slip sole, and then that foam midsole and the rubber outsole. And that's it. And it's not that those materials are bad or the techniques are bad, but usually you see this style of boot under $300. So after analyzing this boot, is there a case for that $430 price? Well, there's a couple points. It's made in the United States, it's a hole cut boot, and that's it. Because those are the only two things that we can identify by completely dissecting this boot that would justify any amount of price bump at all above a regular $200 boot that you would see this style construction on. So there's not a whole lot to point to justify the price until you remember that one word at the beginning of this video, tribute. And I think that's exactly what it is, and it's exactly what I had feared. I think what this shoe is Danner using their heritage name to make a tribute boot. Because, and the thing that's kind of a bummer about it is Danner specializes in combining heritage techniques with modern materials, as we see here. So on their most true heritage boot that has this cool history, it's the boot that built the brand, and to me, it's like the iconic hiker style leather boot. And if I were Danner and I was selling this time-honored brand building boot that's built the brand identity, I would try everything I could to make it as fairly priced as possible so people can understand the Danner heritage and feel almost like, it's kind of cheesy, but like feel the heritage, feel where the boots started and where they're at today. But instead, Danner seems to be charging a premium for these boots, which as a fan of Danner, it makes me feel like they're exploiting my love and nostalgia for Danner just to make a little bit more money. So Danner, just upcharge some of your other boots. Leave the heritage boots to your passionate fans, the brand lovers. Take care of the people and the products that have built your brand. So is this a heritage hoax? Yeah, I think it is, unfortunately. But to be 100% honest with you guys, they aren't so overpriced that I wouldn't buy a pair, because I love the look, I love the brand, I love the story of the boot, but now you know you're paying for the nostalgia, for the brand tax, and you're paying $430 for a $250, maybe a $300 boot. So at least now you can make an educated decision instead of thinking you're buying one of the greatest backpacking boots of all time, when in reality you're buying a tribute to the greatest backpacking boot of all time. So thank you guys so much for supporting this, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, because it's the only way we can keep doing this and inform you guys on what you're spending your hard-earned money on, and let you know when a brand is kind of hawking a little bit of BS and hiding behind some marketing jargon. So thank you guys. See ya. You didn't even come on screen. We'll give the people a little shot. Here's your outro shot.